Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen. It is that time of the year again. Fall is coming. Temperatures are dropping slowly. It's still quite warm here. But the produce out of our garden is coming to fruition. So today I'm going to make a beef stew with butternut squash from our garden, carrots from the garden, onion, and garlic from our garden. And so I've got some reasonably cheap, for today anyway, stewing beef here. Nothing's cheap anymore, is it? If you keep your eyes open, you can find, some of the cheaper or tougher cuts of beef. They work really well in this preparation. Maybe something on sale, pick it up on sale and, buy a bunch of it and stick it in the freezer if you've got a freezer, if you've got space. So salt and pepper on that. I've got flour here. I'm not going to flour the beef. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One of the reasons is the way I'm going to brown this. I really want to get a good searing browning, lots of brown on it. The longer you cook flour, the darker it gets, the less thickening power it has. You also run the risk of getting to a point where it brings bitterness to your dish, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to add that later when I can control the amount of time that it cooks and the heat that it's getting. So salt and pepper on here. I've got oil in the bottom of this Dutch oven. I am not going to follow the given wisdom of today and do this in batches. I'm going to link to a video down below of a beef bourguignon recipe that I made a while back. It's a Paul Bocuse recipe. In his recipes, he talks about browning beef. You chuck it all in the pot. If you've got enough oil, a good enough pot, and good enough heat, and you let it go long enough, you're going to get that Maillard reaction, the browning that you need without putting it in and taking it out. So, worked on that recipe. There's no reason it won't work here. Okay, the last of the beef out. Look at the fond in the bottom of this pot. So in there, I'm going to put onion and carrots. Okay, the onions are softening. The carrots won't soften at this point. They're going to take a while to soften, but it's just a good time to put them in. I'm going to put in the garlic now. Squeeze that in there. There we go. Give it a bit of a stir. The onion and the carrot are pulling up some of the fond on the bottom there, and they're getting coated in it. Smells wonderful. Next in, little hole in the bottom, and about a half a can of tomato paste. That's probably 2 to 3 tablespoons. And I just stir that around on the bottom. I'm just trying to caramelize the tomato a little bit to add a little bit of depth of flavor from the caramelization. When I took the beef out, I dropped the heat down. This had been full bore. And it's an induction cooktop, so it goes to 9, but there's a little boiling pot symbol if you want to bring a pot up to the boil really quickly. It's essentially like turning it to 11. So I was doing that with the beef. I turned it down to 5 for this. That's about all that takes. Now, I've got some red wine. I'm going to put in maybe 2 cups of red wine. Bring this to a simmer. And while it's coming up to a simmer, just scrape the bottom, get all the fond, get the fond off the side. And let that bubble away until the wine has reduced by half. Now, I used red wine. I realize a lot of people don't want to cook with wine. If you don't want to cook with wine, no problem. Increase your beef stock by 2 cups, the amount of wine that I used. And then put in 2 tablespoons of vinegar. But don't put the vinegar in until later in the process. Probably about the time I put the butternut squash in. That's when you would add the vinegar. Now, this particular stew has it's not tied to any one place. So there's no real tradition as to how it would be made. But if you want to be super traditional French cooking beef stew, there is a great case to be made not to use red wine, but to use white wine. When I go back through all of my French cookbooks, printed in France, in French, in the time period of the late 1600s to the mid 1800s, if you were cooking with beef or pork or veal, you were cooking with white wine. If you were making a beef stew, a big hearty beef stew, you were cooking it with white wine, not red wine. That whole red wine thing doesn't really start until the 1900s. Now, this is reduced. The beef goes back in, and whatever juice is in the bottom of this bowl, temperature gets turned down to a bare simmer, and in goes the beef stock. Give it a stir. Lid goes on, and it simmers for 2 hours. Okay, this is looking really good. It's so brown. So much great color going on in here. Now, it's time to thicken it. If you've spent any time here, you know I like to thicken with a beurre manier. If you've never been here before and you don't know what that is, it's equal parts butter and flour mashed together into a paste. You mix it in, and it thickens the sauce. And I like to do it at this point because of some of the problems that you have with making a roux at the beginning. If you brown the flour too much, you lose some thickening power. If you put too much flour in at the beginning, your stew could be over thick. Thickening it now this way gives you minute control over how much thickening you actually get. You put in a little bit, you mix it in, it bubbles and boils, and you can check the thickening, and if you need to add more, you can add more. You can thicken it with precise control at the end. It's looking kind of in the right ballpark. I think I'm going to put in maybe a tablespoon more. Stir that in. Because you've coated the flour with the fat, with the butter, it melts right in. It doesn't clump. As you stir it in, it just melts right in and starts to thicken as it cooks. And for everybody who's going to go on and on about they don't want uncooked flour taste in their stew, there's no uncooked flour taste. There's no uncooked flour taste. It's still cooking. For the flour to thicken the sauce, it has to cook. Therefore, by the time the flour thickens the sauce, it's cooked. Beyond that, I don't taste raw flour. I'm someone who licks the beater every time I make a cake or brownies or cookies. Scrape the bowl, eat the raw batter. And I've never tasted raw flour. I don't know what that tastes like. So next in, I've got one whole butternut squash that I've chopped up into cubes. That goes in. I've got thyme, tarragon, and summer savory. If you don't have summer savory, don't worry about it. You don't need it. I'm going to stir this in. Lid back on, simmer 20 minutes. Here we go. Wonderful stew. Oh my.
Hey Glenn. Hey
girls.
friends. Carrots, squash.
Carrots, squash, onion, beef.
From the garden?
From the garden.
Woohoo!
Oh, is it?
I was not sure. They're big pieces though.
I'm gonna use a spoon.
They were big pieces. I just
Careful, it will be hot.
Fair enough. I'm gonna start with the squash. It's hot though.
Really big flavor, isn't it?
I'm assuming there's some of this in it.
Yep. About 2 cups of that. Tarragon.
Okay.
If you don't cook with tarragon a lot, it is one of those flavors that you really need to kind of walk yourself into slowly. So if you don't want, if you're not used to tarragon, maybe don't use tarragon. I like tarragon. You don't need to put it in. But I think it's a really good flavor enhancer for this.
I
Same with the summer
I like it.
savory. Summer savory can be difficult to get outside of Canada. So if you can't find it, don't beat yourself up about it. It'll be fine without it. This is really good, but it's
Yeah.
super hot.
It is super hot. I am going to have to wait to eat more of it. But it will be good with maybe a biscuit on the side.
Yeah, biscuit, hearty bread, something like that. Add some more veg if you want. Let's put in some peas at the very end.
You can always add more veg.
Peas are something that would go in like the last 5 minutes before you serve it. You don't want to put them in too early.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to sit down and enjoy this for supper.
That
Get some
sounds like
bread.
a good plan.
Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.